All right, cool. All right, I guess we're gonna get started. So, for those of you who know me, which is like 80% of y'all, hi again. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Professor Brandon Herrera. So, I'm one of the new instructors here at UCF. So, today will be like sound design basics lecture. So, I'm not gonna be going into music theory. I'm not gonna be going into music composition. That's like a whole different ballgame. However, if I have more people that are like, yeah, I want to learn about music composition. I want to like do stuff like this. That's cool. So I can be able to make a workshop for that as well. Just a little bit of background about me, about like why I'm qualified. So I have over like 15 years of musical experience. So I play like music is a big part of my life. So I played up to like 5 instruments at a time. So like it's a lot of fun. Started off playing piano a long time ago, and then I transitioned to like brass instruments, woodwind instruments, and things like that. Um, it was a marching night before, so that was a lot of fun too. So I did that for a hot minute. So that was a really big part of my life. I have a lot of like expertise and like different audio softwares and things like that, which I'll get into for this lecture for that one. But yeah, I've done like sound design for games and things like that as well. So for some of you who don't know, I started my own game studio back in 2023. So I've been doing that for a hot minute. So a lot of the sound design stuff, like I'm also working on because we have a small budget because we're indie. But anyways, yeah. So we're just gonna get started on today's lecture. So as I said, it's like basics. So I'm gonna try to my best to like move through it as fast as I can. So I'm just be going over the agenda today. So basically, like just an introduction. Like, does sound design really matter in games? I'll give you guys some resources as well, so that way it can be help you guys along the way. I'm gonna go over some principles and concepts. There is a lot that I could go over and touch base on. However, I'm only gonna touch base on like 12. There's like 15 to 20 that are like really super important. And then I'm gonna give you a brief overview of like Foley work and then final tips and takeaways. So that's pretty much the agenda for today. But as I said, we're gonna get started. So again, this workshop is just mainly for sound design basics. So this is basically going for more along the lines of how do I make good quality audio work for games, right? Now, obviously, this could be used in a variety of different settings for like movies, film, things like that. We can be able to use the same concepts that I'm going to be telling you today to apply it into different mediums. But since we are all game developers, it makes more sense to kind of cater a little bit more towards games. So, all right. So the first question is, does sound design matter? That's right. So a lot of people would not think to themselves like, well, sound design isn't really super duper important. But honestly, for anything that you do in life, like people are not going to notice until you do something wrong. So sound design, in short, is yes, it does. Yes, it does in fact matter. And the reason why for that is because sound design is super important. And this is not just in regard to music, right? A lot of people would think, oh yeah, sound is like just music. This is just like how I'm going to be able to make the player feel. Although that may be the case, that's not always true because you have a whole bunch of different stuff as well, like sound effects, Foley work, ambience, and dialogue. So I'm going to touch base on these a little bit more so that way like we can just take a little bit of a deep dive for it. But it's a super wide field. It is a lot of fun once you know how to like really get into it. But yes, sound design does matter. So there are different types of sounds that we're going to be talking about today. So there are two. So the biggest ones are diegetic and non-diegetic. So what exactly are diegetic sounds and non-diegetic sounds? Diegetic sounds are those that exist in the real world. So those are things like footsteps or like a door closing, things like that. Non-diegetic sounds, however, are things that are going to be meant for audiences. So things like music, sound effects, things like that. Those are non-diegetic sounds. So again, two schools of thought for it. Obviously, there could be like a lot more, but these are the two we're going to be focusing on. I will touch base on it a little bit more as we go. But yeah, so sound design for video games itself, right? So there are a lot of differences between film, movies, television, and our medium. Now the thing is for us for sound designers is we always want to make sure that we have the ability to match up the audio as soon as the player has an interaction with something. I put the creeper up here, for example, from Minecraft because when you are in the game, right? and you accidentally hit a creeper or a creeper is coming towards you. When that creeper explodes, there's not a delay in sound at all. Like it's more of like an instant type of feel. For us, we want to make sure that it has to respond to the player actions. That's really the biggest thing. For film, for music, anything else, it's a little bit different. We could have a little bit of a delay or a sustain for it. It actually makes some things a little bit better. However, for what we're doing, it's gonna be a little bit different. So again, instant actions, like instant gratification. That's really the biggest thing that I want you guys to take away from this. Okay, cool. So now that I talked about that, I'm going to be giving you just a little bit of resources. So the first one is I'm going to be talking to you about DAWs. So before I get into that, probably some people are going to be like, well, what's a DAW, right? So good thing you ask. A DAW is actually a digital audio workstation. So these are things that are going to be used in a wide variety of different settings. So DAWs are going to be things that are kind of like a game engine. So kind of like Unity and Unreal, like you'd have to have something in order for you to be able to actually make high quality sounds. Now, for me, I like using FL Studio, aka Fruity Loops, like if you want to go down that route, or Ableton, like those are the two that I really like using. I would highly not recommend that you learn FL Studio and Ableton at the same time. For my artists in here, you know that for Maya and for Blender, although it does the same thing, completely different interfaces, like completely different layouts. It's the same thing for FL Studio and Ableton. Like don't do it. Like learn one or the other first. But that's just a brief breakdown of what DAWs are. So here's some DAWs that I want to talk to you guys about. So some of the ones that are like industry standard, quote unquote, or like super high quality stuff. One of them is actually going to be Reaper. So I know that some people are like, well, that's weird that Reaper is like a real like a DAW that people use in the games industry. It actually is like one of those things that a lot of indie studios use for that one. It's actually super cheap. So for like the general, just for like the basic one, it's gonna be like $60. However, you want to get like the industry standard one, I think it's gonna be like 150, I think $200, I think, as far as I'm aware of. Ableton and Logic Pro are also really, really good when it comes to DAWs. Logic Pro, on the other hand, has a super wide sound library. Like it's extensive. It's like super, super big. Now, Ableton, making real-time sounds, like, so basically stuff that's going to be like slow, and as soon as you be able to record it, just place it in there. Or you can be able to make like good high quality soundscapes as well. I'll talk about soundscapes a little bit more, but these are some of the ones that I say like, hey, look, these are good. I'm not saying the whole time that you have to go ahead and use these because there's like a whole bunch available to you, but use some of the top 3. So with that being said, I have more sources for you for that one. So for me, on my free time, I do like to read. So I know I'm a big nerd, but anyways, some of the books I have up here are actually going to be really, 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 really good for you. One of them being music in the role-playing game. So any of you who like playing like RPGs and things like that, this book right here is going to be really, really good. I actually have it in my office. It's a really good read. Principles of Game Audio and Sound Design, also another one that's going to be really good for you. It breaks down really more of the principles of why like sound matters and how we're going to be able to use that in our medium. And then the last one, this is one I had to read when I was in architecture school, was like Architectures of Sound. So that one is more technical based. That one's going to be more along the lines of like, why does sound matter in a real world setting? I would recommend that only because, again, it's going to make you understand sound on a higher level than what it would actually be. But it does get a little more technical for that one. This, like, the sound for architecture is mainly focused more towards like, well, how am I going to make like good quality spaces for performing arts centers, or how am I going to make good quality sound for like classrooms and things like that. So these are the 3 books that I would recommend for you guys to read in your free time if you have the time to do so. And then there's also like free websites, because we love websites. So one of the places that I look for when like trying to get like good sound is it credible? Is it able to like have like a big archive, and am I able to use it like a lot? So these 3 up here are actually going to be really, really good. So the GDC Sound Archive is going to be something that you want to be able to look in on, only because, again, it's from the Game Developers Conference. Like a whole bunch of game developers like will put all their sound stuff on there. It is a little bit finicky at times, because if you try to download some stuff, you have to actually like go through some hoops for that one. So there's that. Free sound is another good one as well. So that one is going to be more along the lines of getting good, high quality sounds. And then the Unity Asset Store as well. If any of you work in Unity, like the Asset Store is actually a really good place for you to be able to get sound, like just free audio sources. I mean, there are some that you may have to pay for, but but these are some of the ones I have up here. Honestly, there's a super wide variety of different stuff that you can be able to use and record sound, make music, things like that. But yeah, these are the three that I would recommend only to start off with. From there, like you can explore a little bit more, take a deeper dive on it. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to be talking about like main principles slash concepts like of sound. So these are the 12 that I'm putting up here. Again, there's like 15 to 20 that are like really super important, but I want to focus on these 12 only for one, it's kind of important, and two, for time. So anyway, I'm just going to be going over things like context, clarity and focus. I'll be going over layering, contrast, rhythm and timing, silence, mood and emotion, perspective, soundscapes. I'm going to touch briefly more on diegetic versus non-diegetic sounds, dynamic range and interactivity. So those are the things I'm going to be talking about a little bit. So I'm going to keep it moving. So context. So for games, right? It doesn't matter how cool the sound is. Doesn't matter how amazing the music is if you don't have context behind it. That's the super biggest thing. So sound should always be appropriate for the situation at hand. It's the same thing when you're a lighting artist or you're a level designer and you're making stuff and you're putting stuff in engine and you're like, yeah, this is really cool, but you're not giving it the right context. So I'll give you an example. If you're playing a horror game, usually the sounds that you want are more like suspenseful. They're really more pull at your heartstrings. They're making you like anxious, this, that, and the other. Now, it wouldn't really make any sense if you were to go ahead and put happy music to it, right? It's not gonna fit properly. You want to be able to go ahead and make sounds that are going to fit the context of what you're doing. So one of the biggest things that you want to do first is you want to make sure that you get with your level designers and your artists. Try to figure out the main concept of what you're trying to do, and think about like what kind of sounds you want to make for your game. So again, don't make it in a way where it's like, yeah, I'm just gonna put any random sound in here. You're not gonna get the same amount of like feeling and emotion from your players if you have the wrong context. So that's concept number one. Concept number two, clarity and focus, right? So for clarity and focus, one of the biggest things to keep in mind is to understand that most sounds, it should stand out clearly compared to other sounds that are more of a support role. So for example, when you have a character that is talking to you, like, do you want your music to be super loud? No. The reason why you want your music to kind of dim down a little bit because you want to focus more on the clarity of the person talking. You don't want to have like a whole bunch of different sounds coming out all over the place and you're like, well, I can't really hear what's going on. It's like if you're at a concert and you're trying to talk to somebody in a normal voice right next to you, it's not going to work the same way because again, like there's too much going on. You want to make sure that you focus in on what exactly that sound is. Give you another example. If you go ahead and you play like Super Mario, right? And Mario is running across the screen and he hits a block. The music will kind of fade down a little bit, even though like people would not actually think about it. More along the lines of they get that instant gratification because, hey, look, I got a coin. So think about it that way. When we're using like the concepts for this, like make sure that your audio, like make sure you have like integral moments that you can be able to focus in on instead of going ahead and just be like, yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna go ahead and have the music be the same volume the whole time. Again, it's not gonna work. You're taking away from like really special moments that the player is like really looking forward to. So, and also you don't want to overwhelm them either. Like that's another thing also. Like you don't want to go ahead and just put too much stuff here and there and then like the player's gonna get confused and then they're gonna rage quit and we don't want to do that. So clarity and focus, super important. All right, cool. Layering. Layering is also another thing that's going to be super important. The reason why I put a cake here is because, again, that's like a good representation of what layering is. So what layering is I'll take it in a music sense. So when we're going ahead and you're thinking about how to create good quality music, right? you're going to start off with either a drum beat, an 808, things like that, right? From there, if you have the drum beat, if you have the bass line to add on top of that, what are you going to do? You can add so many different things. You can add like a piano part, you can add like a horn part, string part on top of that, and you keep layering it and layering it and layering it to make a really good quality sound, good quality feeling that you can be able to be like, yeah, this is great. This is awesome. So when you listen to music and things like that, that's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I want to be able to like know how they did that. A lot of it is just layering. It's the same thing with it's the same thing with audio. It's the same thing with sound stuff also. Like when we make soundscapes, which I'll get into, that's a whole another concept of like what layering actually is and what it can be able to do for the player. So again, oftentimes when we're game developers, we try to think to ourselves that like, yeah, we're just making cool games, but it- oftentimes people don't really realize that you're really making games for the player and not just for yourself. Because you can talk with other game developers every single time and be like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. But again, we're not catering towards that audience. We're catering more towards the player. That's all we're doing, really. It's just making sure that the player is having a good time with what stuff that you created. You always got to make sure you keep the player's interest at heart. Don't ever think to yourself that, yeah, I'm just making this because like I have to. Like think about games that you played. Think about stuff that you've done. You're like, man, I wish I would like the games were like a little bit better if they would have just focused on this more. So oftentimes when people think about games, again, they don't keep the player's focus at heart. So make sure you think about that as like when you guys graduate, go off into the world and do cool things. Always remember that for us, we're just catering to somebody else. At this point, be the player. So cool. So contrasting. Contrasting is another thing that's kind of like a little bit difficult to understand, but it is one of those things where once you kind of get into it, kind of makes a little bit more sense. So for contrasting, it's literally just having two different things that are like doing the same, like doing something else. So like comparing apples to oranges, same fruit, different stuff, right? Completely different things. So in the case of sound design, so for contrasting is basically use of varying sound qualities to help create tension or bring emphasis to a player. So, for example, like if you have, let's see here, let me think. So, like for example, if you were to have like a loud sound versus like a quiet sound, like if you're contrasting the two together, or if you have like air horns going off at the same time, and now you're trying to think to yourself, well, now I don't know what's going on. You're giving that player a sense of suspense. You're giving them that sense of like, I don't know what's going on. Like this is like too much at one time. So sometimes having contrasting elements when it comes to sound, it really helps to be able to go ahead and make the actual game even that more fun. So there's that for that one. So let's see what else I could talk about. Okay, yeah. So rhythm and timing is another thing that I want to really touch base on. If you don't have any rhythm and you don't have timing, like you really have another thing coming, especially when it comes to like dialogue features. Now, if you've seen like really old movies and you're watching it and the person is talking, but it's not syncing up correctly, this is why I'm going back and saying that it's really super important that you have the action link up properly to the actual sound itself. So if you have that point where you have the character and you're not syncing up the audio correctly with the sound with the facial movements, again, you're really not going to do anything. Like it's now the players could be like, well, am I lagging? Am I really going ahead and like is my GPU like is it going down? Like am I like I don't understand what's going on. At this point, you would talk more with your animators to be sure that everything is syncing up correctly. Now, one of the other things I want to touch base on is that you really have to make sure that every single time that you are making like good sound for your games, especially when it comes to Foley work, keep rewatching the the actual gameplay every single time in order for you to get up to speed, try to figure out what you're doing. So the only time that would not that would work, quote unquote, is if you want to have like an intentional disjointed effect. So basically, like if you were intentionally doing like, yeah, I kind of want to stagnate like the sound a little bit, like that's okay. But by and large, like you have to make sure that the rhythm and the timing of your sound links up properly with what you're trying to do. So again, rhythm that doesn't necessarily mean like making a beat or something like that. Rhythm is when you're talking or when you're going ahead and making sure that there's like ebbs and flows to everything. Again, it links up properly, proper timing of elements. And then we talk about silence. So silence actually plays a huge role in what we do, or especially for like movies and things like that as well. So for silence, usually you want to use this in cases where it's going to be either really, really super suspenseful or you're trying to make the player figure out what's going on next. The reason why I put this explosion up here is because oftentimes when a player steps on a bomb or something like that and they get blown away to like to Kingdom Come, usually everything is silent, it's muted. And why is that? Again, it brings a sense of suspense. It brings a sense of like, I don't know what just happened. Now, the only other time that you would be able to put sound in this one is if you put like a high pitched noise, like put like a ringing in the ear or something like that. Like that will give more suspense anyways for that one. But again, always make sure that when you use silence, you use it intentionally. A lot of chaotic scenes or scenes that are like giving you a sense of isolation, like if you're in a dark room or if you ever played Kingdom Hearts and you see like Sora just floating like through the darkness and things like that, there's really not a lot of sound. Again, you're really focusing more on just the character itself and what they're thinking about. Or if you're in space, really, that's another thing too, because space doesn't really have any sound. So that's another thing if you're having like a space game or your player gets like sucked out into like the nethers and things like that. Again, super, super, super quiet stuff. It gives you a sense of suspense and isolation. So sound, again, make sure that when you're putting silence in your games, which is really super easy to do, but putting silence in your games and things like that, just make sure you have it in a sense where it, again, integral moments. Don't be putting it in like random places because then it's going to be like, what's the point of this? So cool. All right. So mood and emotion, right? So mood and emotion is is something else that is like super duper important, especially when you have epic moments, especially when you have things that are like you want to be able to make the player feel something. So for mood and emotion, this can go one of two ways. So if you use the right sound choices, like for example, if you're using things like, I don't know, just a big choir, for example, if you're getting to that point where you're walking up a mountain or you're getting to that point where you're like, I'm about to have an epic win, things like that, you want to, again, convey like, you want to make the player emotional. Really, it's really the biggest thing when it comes to sound. So, also, again, another thing you want to try to think about as well for mood, again, just try to keep the player's interest at heart. Don't be going ahead and just thinking to yourself that if I'm gonna have a scary game, obviously have scary noises. Have more dark, have more underlying like sound effects. Even for film. I know for horror game, like for horror films and things like that, for some reason there are places where like you get like a lot of suspense, but there's really nothing going on. It's actually not the case. There's actually a certain sound effect that actually plays with your brain a little bit. So basically what happens is in the film industry, they found this one specific sound that you can't necessarily hear it, but your brain actually like hears it, quote unquote, in a sense where it kind of triggers you and it makes you like your hands like sweaty and like now you're starting to like have your heart rate go up a little bit more. Things like that. That's another way for you to be able to convey mood. So I'm not sure what exactly that specific sound is because they like to gatekeep a lot. But anyways, yeah, sounds like this. So I'm like, just make sure you keep those things in mind, really. So yeah, again, make your player emotional, make them cry, make them happy, make them angry, and in perspective. So perspective is another thing that we want to make sure we touch base on really quick because if I'm at one end of the hallway and you're at the other end of the hallway and I am trying to talk to you, usually the sound should be far away, right? Like usually, because again, you're farther away from somebody. Rather than if someone is right next to me, like you can be like, oh yeah, this is like I can hear you just fine. Perspective is really big too. You want to make sure that for your sound, like you want to make sure you're putting it in a place where it makes sense. So if a sound is farther away, or if you have an NPC that's like farther away, obviously you don't want to make the NPCs like like dialogue and things like that. You don't want to make it super close. Again, you're trying to make it more realistic, trying to make it more real lifelike in a sense. So that's the reason why you're going ahead and putting stuff farther away, or you're putting stuff closer to you. If you have a player or you have something that's interactable and you hit it and you're closer to it, obviously your sound's gonna be a lot higher than would it be for something that's a lot farther away. So yeah. So there is that. And then soundscapes. So remember how I said before that soundscapes are super important and layering is a super big thing? So this is what I mean. So soundscapes are basically areas where there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but it makes something really cool. So what I mean by that is take, for example, a forest. Now, when you're in a forest, you probably don't think to yourself that there's a lot going on. Yeah, you hear the wind and things like that, but you get to realize that there's other stuff there, like the trees are blowing. There's little critters that are running around. There's like a river right next to you. There is leaves that are rustling. You can hear other people talking, things like that. This is what a good soundscape is like. Again, you're putting layers on top of each other to make sure that you're making a good quality experience. So again, even when you are in, like when you're in engine and you're making stuff for your environments and things like that, always make sure that you actually put more stuff to it. Like the player is probably not going to be able to think about it too much until you actually forget to put something in there, and then they're going to rage quit. So if you look at Red Dead Redemption 2 and you are riding your horse through a scene, you would probably think to yourself, oh yeah, I'm only hearing like the horse gallop. Well, that's not really the case. You can see little rabbits like flying by. You can see like birds in the sky. You can be able to see like, you can be able to hear the wind blowing. You can be able to hear other people walk by. This is what I mean by like soundscapes are really super important and why layering is super important. So again, soundscapes are just a combination of sounds within a scene. So if you're able to build that from the ground up, which you would use all the other stuff I told you about, that's what's going to create a cool, high quality soundscape for you. Even putting music in there as well, it could be like something cool. But you want to give it that little bit of an extra umph to get it from having a good game to a really great game. So keep that in mind. So when you're creating soundscapes, and I can go in a little bit more detail about that in a little bit. But for now, we're going to keep moving on. So, all right, so cool. So again, I'm just going to go back to diegetic and non-diegetic sounds really quick. So this is basically, again, diegetic sounds are things that happen in the real world. Non-diegetic sounds are things that enhance what's already there. So to give you a good representation of what non-diegetic sounds are, if you look on, I know it's like, that's kind of hard to see, but like non-diegetic sounds like voiceover work, that's a non-diegetic sound. Even though technically that's a diegetic sound that happens in the real world, for like film and things like that, non-diegetic sounds would be things that you would just place on top of the model to make it seem more alive. So diegetic sounds would be things like ambient noise or like sound effects, like birds chirping, things like that. That's really the main differences between the two. But again, just make sure you keep those things in mind because again, people are going to ask you, what's the difference between diegetic and non-diegetic? That's the difference. So, okay, cool. Dynamic ranges. So that's another thing that I kind of want to touch base on. So dynamic ranges is like, it's basically the difference between the softest and the loudest sounds within a given mix. So when we're thinking about dynamic ranges, we also want to make sure to optimize and maintain the clarity of it. So even in like biggest forms of impact and things like that, you want to be able to not have like a sustained sound throughout. You want to make sure that, again, there's ebbs and flows to it. You want to make sure that there are going to be moments where are going to be a little bit softer and a little bit louder. Again, in a music sense, like it makes it a little bit easier to comprehend, only because for one, if you're having moments where like it's kind of sullen, kind of soft, you don't want to have like loud noises. You want to kind of have that in between. It's kind of like an accordion. You kind of want to have it in between where it kind of ebbs and flows and you're able to go ahead and think to yourself, like, does this make sense? So that's one of the biggest things when I say about dynamic ranges. So think about when something crescendos or decrescendos, something gets bigger and then something gets smaller at the same time. So again, it's not loud, 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 and then it's soft, 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 soft. Again, it's more along the lines of it's like a bell curve. Keeps going up and down and straight through. All right, cool. So, and then just the last little bit that I want to talk about is just interactivity. So again, we want to be able to make sure we want to immerse the player in like our game. So you want to be sure that sounds itself can be really interactive. So even if you think to yourself that like, well, I don't know how I'm going to be able to like implement this in like a game. I don't really know how I'm going to be able to do that. Well, there's a whole bunch of ways you can be able to do it. Again, I want to go back to the example of like Super Mario when he hits a block. That's an interactive sound. Or when you press a button, right? That's an interactive sound also. Or maybe when you open the door, interactive sounds. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on when we're thinking about like how like sound works and things like that. But interactivity, super duper duper important because again, we want to make a more immersive, more realistic approach to stuff like this. So yeah. And then what else was I going to say? I think there was one other thing I was going to talk about. Oh, okay, yeah. Now, like I went over the concepts. So again, like these are things that are kind of like straightforward, things that you probably should already know, or things that you kind of want to touch base on just a little bit. But that being said, I'm going to go into some of the best practices that were going to be used for sound designers. So the first one, again, understand the game's genre and atmosphere. So I'm just going to reiterate this again because it's super important. If you have a sound that doesn't fit the genre or the atmosphere of the game, it's not going to work. That's why I said like make sure you talk with your designers and your artists to figure out what exactly your genre or what you're going towards. If you make once you understand what the genre is, what the story is, what the setting is, now you're going to get to that point where it's like, okay, well now I can start working. So first step, make sure you understand what you're doing. Make sure you understand the concept of the game. Make sure you understand the genre itself. So, number 2, prioritize the player feedback. So, this is not in the sense where I'm like, hey, we want your feedback on this sound. Now, I'm talking in the literal sense, like you want to make sure that the sound is clear and immediate every single time. So, again, no delays, no stuff that's going to be like awkward silence and things like that. You want to make sure that it's immediate every single time. So, always time it perfectly with player actions. Always, 100% of the time. Do not pass go, do not collect 200. Same thing, every single time. Okay. And then for this one, although we have sounds that we're going to be able to play with, although we recorded our own stuff that we want to be able to go ahead and be like, yeah, I have this done. I can place it in an engine. Wrong. We want to be able to optimize it correctly. To be able to do that, we do have a lot of software that we can be able to use. A lot of them are middleware softwares. There are 2. There are Fmod and Wwise. Those are going to be really to be able to make sure you EQ your stuff correctly and then reduce the file size and take out any extra stuff that should not be there to begin with. So optimizing sound is super important, although people will think, yeah, I just record a sound, just place it in an engine. Like you have to clean it a little bit. Not a whole lot, but like if you really want high quality sounds, like stuff that's going to make the player go like, wow, this is cool, clean it. 100% of the time, clean it. Like I said before, we gotta have use middleware. So basically, WWise and Fmod are really the biggest things that you're gonna be able to use. So although you can be able to use like FL Studio, Ableton, Logic Pro, Audacity, things like that. Although like you'd be able to record a sound and make the sound, highly recommended that you put it through a middleware software. That way you can be able to clean it up just a little bit more. Because there are things that the DAW can be able to use that be able to clean it up. But having a middleware really helps a lot. It helps to reduce the file size also, because if you put too many sounds in your game and you don't optimize it correctly, like you're gonna make like your game lag. That's the same thing with lighting too. Like you want to make sure that you optimize it correctly, because if you put too many lights in your game, it's gonna crash your game also. So that's one of the things that we want to talk about is Fmod and WYs. I'll go in a little bit about it probably later, or if you have time after class and you want to talk to me about it, we can be able to do so. So this is another one that we want to do, that once you have the sound optimized and you have it like clear, ready to go, and you place it in Engine, you want to be able to use positional and 3D audio. So positional audio is basically things that are like static versus dynamic, things like that. However, the good thing about sound is that we already have it in our engines as well. So in Unity and Unreal, there are sound tools that you can be able to use in there that's already in-house. You don't have to worry about it. You can literally just place it in Engine and go as you must. So it's already pre-installed on here. So again, when you put it in there, you can actually position your sound in a way where it makes it, there's only one area that has a sound, or you can make it in a way where everything in the scene, it has like a sound to it or attached to it. So real easy stuff for that one. So, and there's a lot of resources up there available to you. So things like Unity forums, Unreal forums, super duper helpful. So yeah, okay, cool. The other one is you want to make sure you maintain consistency. So when you have a player walk from one point to another, you want to make sure that the sound stays with them every single time. But I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. You also don't want your player to get audio fatigue. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. But if you have a sound that's recurring every single time, you just want to make sure it stays consistent. Again, if you have a horse walking across the street, or if you're having a car driving down the road, make sure it's consistent. Don't go ahead and just like have it where it's like the car is like at a stagnant stationary pace, but then like it's all over the place. Like you don't want, like, obviously you want the sound to be consistent every single time. Only time that would not be the case if you have the player stationary and you're having the player, like you see the car drive by. Obviously it's gonna get quieter, then it's gonna get louder, and it's gonna get quieter again. But when you're inside the car, it's consistent the whole time. So maintain consistency, please, when you're doing your stuff. Don't go ahead and just place sounds in there and be like, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and just place it in there and call it a day. So I just want to talk a little bit about audio fatigue really quick. So basically what audio fatigue is, if someone hears the exact same sound every single time, they're going to get really bored of it. So notice when, which I'm going to talk about this in like in Foley work and things like that as well. But when you have a player walking, even just like really mundane stuff, notice how that sound isn't the same every single time. If you're wearing a pair of boots compared to a pair of sneakers, even though you're walking, you're doing the movement, that sound is not the same. That's the same thing if you're going ahead and you hear two birds chirping at the same time. It may sound the same to you, but you want to have a little bit of variation so that way your sound, like your players are not going to be like, oh, I can't believe I'm hearing this thing all over again, because it gets boring after a while, and we don't want that. We want it to be able to like maintain more stuff as we go. We want to be able to have a good experience for the player. So, okay, cool. So, although many people would think that Foley work only applies to film and television, actually a lot of AAA title studios actually use Foley work quite a bit for that one. So what exactly are Foley sounds? So Foley sounds were named after the audio pioneer, Jack Foley. So Jack decided that, in order for me to make good quality sounds, I got to figure out a way for me to be able to do this. So the good thing about Foley work is pretty much anybody can be able to do it. All you need is just everyday items and a lot of creativity. Now, the reason why I put Foley work in here is because it gives the player a little bit of extra, like, oh, this is really cool. It gives you, as a game developer, a little bit of sense of extra juice for that one as well. So, how do I create Foley sounds? So, again, you have to have a lot of creativity for you to be able to do stuff like this. So, one of the best ways I can think about is everybody knows what a carrot is, right? If I were to go up to the microphone and get a carrot and snap the carrot, now for you visually, what you're going to be seeing, you're going to see a carrot snap. However, if you put it into a movie, you put it into a game, and you don't see that the carrot is like, to see the carrot is there, that carrot sound implements, like it imitates a bone breaking, if you really think about it. Or, for example, like let's say if you combine the two, right? You have like a piece of meat and you have a carrot. If you break the carrot and like you hit the piece of meat at the same time, now you're getting that sense where it's like now it's like a monster is like eating something and then like it's crushing bones. Same thing with celery, right? If you use like a celery stick and you freeze it for a little bit and you snap it again, it's the same thing if you were to like go ahead and break a bone or something like that. Or let's say if you want to like make some rain noise outside, easy. All you do is just get a hose and like get like a metal sheet. Literally just put the hose on like a low setting and just like spray it down. Like things like that. Like it's really easy stuff. Or if you have like a scene where someone gets hit in the face with a rubber ball, you get a rubber ball, you hit it on the ground. That's another way for you to be able to create cool Foley work. So you're probably thinking, well, how does like Foley work actually happen? Well, they have like super big sound studios, and depending on what studio you decide to go to, that has their own Foley studio that has all different types of stuff. So when we're going back to right here, they actually have different places where you're able to have like rocks, dirt, wood that you can be able to actually walk on to imitate that sound that you're trying to see that's on the screen. So again, I'll go in a little bit more detail about it, but all right. So, but that's like a really brief overview of like Foley sounds. Now, some of the best practices that I want you guys to think about is, for one, use proper equipment. Now, if we're talking about like voices and things like that, we want to use a compressed mic. The compressed mic is the one down on the bottom right. So that one is more for along the lines of like, hey, I want to make sure that like I have good quality stuff. I want to make sure I have good high quality sound. However, if you're doing stuff like Foley work, that's where a shotgun mic comes in. However, I understand we're broke college students. We don't really have the like the money to be able to have mics like this. What's cool? Pretty much all of you have a phone, right? It's the same thing. You can be able to actually use a whole bunch of different stuff with just your phone. For those of you who like have an Apple device, you can use like voice memos and just record that as you go. Now, if you want to record like wind effects and things like that, easy. You put your phone inside of a sock. And then from there, like it will be able to muffle the noise a little bit more, but you can still get that high quality sound. So using the quality equipment that's given to you, it's got to really help your sound actually expand it a lot more. We use shotgun mics because again, like you're actually focusing more on just a specific sound, not just like the actual like audio from like your voice or things like that as well. Plus, sometimes when you do Foley work, sometimes like the sound itself isn't like super duper loud. So again, you want to put it there to make sure that you're getting like actual good quality feedback. All right, match the sound to the action itself. So, have you ever seen that episode of SpongeBob where like Mr. Krabs is like a robot and SpongeBob is like, "What color's my underwear?" And then you slap him across the face with it. You want to make sure like when you're watching either the game, the film, what you're seeing, you have to make sure you watch it every single time to get that exact moment right. Usually for Foley work, I would recommend this more for cinematic scenes, only because again, like you're watching it every single time. You're making sure that the sound links up properly with everything else. So make sure you keep those things in mind for when you're doing that. Like make sure that the sound actually portrays what you're trying to do. And then make sure you layer and mix your sounds. So layering again, super important. When you're doing like Foley work and things like that, I'll give you an example. Is if someone is walking, like yeah, you'll record the footsteps, but in order to give it a more of an intense feeling, like get your pair of pants and ruffle it together. So when you're going ahead and walking at the same time, notice that there's multiple sounds, multiple layers on top of that. You can't just be having just someone walking across. Like sometimes when you're looking at it, like clothes ruffle, like or you step on something, layer it on top of each other to make sure that you get like the best quality sound available to you. So that's another cool thing as well. All right. And then using the right materials. Now, this one should be pretty straightforward, but if you're trying to make a sound that's like more wood based, obviously use a piece of wood. If you're trying to make something that's a little bit more metal based, use a sheet metal, like something like that. Or if you're trying to make sounds that, like if you're throwing a ball, use a ball. So again, don't be making sounds that are not going to link up properly with what you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to walk across a wood surface, use wood. Why would you use concrete? Different sounds. So make sure you keep that in mind when you're going ahead and making cool stuff. So, and this is what I mean before, like when I said have variations of it. Don't go ahead and just create just one sound. Create multiple takes of it. Again, you want to have a different variety so the player doesn't get any audio fatigue or sound fatigue. Again, not every sound is the exact same. If I were to clap my hands once and I have someone else clap their hands at the same time, the sound quality is going to be completely different, even though we're doing the exact same motion. So always make sure you record variations of your stuff. Make sure that when you're going ahead and putting sounds in Engine or you're putting it in a DAW or things like that, you can always alter the pitch, the speed, the volume, things like that as well, in order for you to get even cooler sounds. So it's another thing as well. Again, variety, source of life. Just yeah. And then use environmental textures to your advantage. So again, this one doesn't really like play more towards the actual gameplay experience, more like so for cinematic sequences. But again, if you want to use like dirt, grass, wood, you can record those and be able to get that to the best of your ability. So just make sure you keep that in mind. Like again, you can literally just walk outside and just have someone walk on grass. You can just record it the whole time. Easy stuff. Or if you have like someone wants to touch some grass, something like that, like no, that's another thing too you can probably do as well. So okay, cool. And then now we're gonna get into the little final portion where it's like, what do I do after I create the Foley sounds, right? What am I gonna do to be like, okay, now I have the sound. Now what? Okay, good thing you ask. So the first one is to make sure you edit and clean up your sound itself. Now, the reason why I say this is because oftentimes you are gonna get something that's gonna be like not in that what you wanted for your good quality sound. Like there may be a car going by or something like that. You make sure you edit that out of it. That's why I said like probably before to use middleware to help you like optimize it and clean it up properly. Always make sure that you have like fade in and fade out as needed for that one as well. Normalize the levels for it as well. Like if there are some places where it's like this particular sound is too high, make sure you actually normalize it. You actually use the EQ for that one as well. So, and remove background noise. Really biggest thing. So again, edit and clean up is the first step. So once you edit and clean it up, now you're gonna move it to layer it and enhance it. So for Foley work especially, like it doesn't work if you're just having one sound, you wanna have multiple layers on top of it. So you wanna make sure you layer the sounds and you also use like reverbs and delays on there as well to match like the space in the game. So if you, for example, if you're in a large lecture hall, you want to make sure to like either put a little bit of reverb on it or have a little bit of a delay. That way it can give you more sense of like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This is cool. So, and then you also want to adjust the pitch and the speed of it also. That's another really big thing. And then this is one thing that all game developers have a hard time with. I know I've seen some of y'all like name your files incorrectly, and I'm like, but super important is to organize and name your files properly. This is super important because if you're going to be recording a lot of sounds and you're going to be putting it in a certain place, you want to make sure that you label it correctly so you know what sound you're getting. Don't be putting it in there like, oh yeah, this is a balloon popping, and you're going to put like balloon. You have 3 different sound effects for balloons. Which one is it? Instead of going in every single time, just clicking on it, just seeing which one it is, name your files correctly and be sure to organize it well. So your coders are going to be the ones that are going to be really on top of you with that, because if you don't name your stuff correctly and you don't put it in a correct file source, they're going to be like, what are you doing? Why did you not go ahead and put this in the right spot? Again, it saves you more time and more of a headache if you just name your files correctly and you organize it properly. So, yeah. And then also organize it in a way where everybody can be able to understand what exactly it is. It's another thing also. So, and then at this point, now that you have everything like good to go, when you clean it up, when you go ahead and optimize it correctly, when you go ahead and you place it in the file, it's now time to place the sounds in Engine. Now, to be able to do that, it's a little bit easy, but a little bit complicated at the same time. Now, for sound itself, as I said, you can place it into Engine just fine. However, there is one caveat with that is you're gonna have to learn how to write code for it, because it's not gonna make any difference if you put sound in your game if it's not gonna be able to play at a specific time. Now, for Unity, you're gonna be using C sharp, and then for Unreal, we're using blueprints. It's the same thing applies. Like, I know it sucks, it's horrible, but you gotta do what you gotta do. You gotta go ahead and actually make the source code for it. Now, the good thing is, like I said before, there is a lot of forums that you can be able to use to be able to actually figure out what the actual source code is and how to be able to implement that correctly. I just put these two up here because, again, it just makes it easier for a little visual representation for it. But yeah, blueprints, it's kind of variations of like C++, kind of, but not really. But again, when you're placing it in Engine, again, you also want to touch base with some of the sound stuff in there as well. So, and then final thoughts. So, again, for this sound design workshop itself, again, I really just wanted to touch base on more like just general stuff, because again, like I want to make sure that everyone has a basic understanding of what exactly sound is, why does it matter, like what makes it cool, what makes it important, rather than going ahead and just talking about like more technical stuff, rather than going ahead and just being like, yeah, you know what, I'm gonna be talking about like beats per minute. I'm gonna be talking about like, I don't know, probably like major and minor keys. I'm gonna be talking about like dynamic tones and things like that. Like, obviously, like we have to start with the basics first. So that's the reason why I wanted to start with the sound design stuff, because another thing also, our program doesn't really talk a lot about sound design. And I really think it's important for us to be able to actually understand what we're doing and how we're gonna be able to implement sound correctly. So that's one of the things like I really wanted to make sure that you guys have a better understanding of. And the same thing goes for like lighting and things like that as well. We don't really talk about lighting a lot either, but that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, that's really all I really wanted to say for my portion of what sound actually is and why does it matter. Again, this is just basics. So majority of you probably already knew some of this stuff already, but really want to touch base on it a little bit more for people who didn't know anything about sound or didn't know anything about like how to go about creating cool sounds. So yeah, this is for you for that one. So for my students, like good news is I will put all like these slides onto my web courses. For those of you who are not my students, it's okay. I can get your email and I can send it to you. So really easy stuff. But yeah, I appreciate you guys coming. Honestly, it makes like a world of difference to make sure that at least hopefully you get gained some knowledge from this. So hopefully I answered some questions you may have. If you do have more questions, just feel free to reach out to me. Like I'll be here for that one. So, and then yeah, the only other thing I was gonna say is that if you guys are into mocap, things like that, Next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, in this room, Professor Morrison's doing a workshop. This is just for like learn for more about mocap cleanup, just to make sure that you guys actually know how to be able to push that into Engine properly. But yeah, that is it. If you guys have any questions, I'll be around for like a minute or so because I have class at 1:30. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, just let me know. But thank you. Sweet. Woo.